There we go. Live. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Earth School Journey. Today, we have a great conversation coming forward. This is another one that has been near and dear to our heart. It's a continuing conversation of the conscious community conversation. We're talking about spiritual etiquette. And today, I am your host and your peer guide, Umi Steph. And joining me today is my co-host, Uni. Hi. So, just to recap, last week we had a conversation about what conscious community is and why it's important, and we really kind of went deep into what conscious community is and what it meant to us. And this week we're kind of taking that just a little bit deeper by talking about spiritual etiquette. Um, and so I think what we just need to do is just dive in. Like, let's just dive in and get started. Um, so Uni, I'm going to put this to you first, and you can kind of give us a good definition of what is spiritual etiquette and spiritual manners.
Yes, thank you so much, Umi. So for me, spiritual etiquette and spiritual manners is showing up in wholesome, in wholeness, rather. Excuse me. It's showing up to your community, to any space that you embody in wholeness, and making sure that you are not, draining or taking away or bringing the vibration down of the environment that you are in. One of the things that we have learned in our spiritual classes and things of that nature are how manifestation needs higher vibration, right?
Right.
When we are in lower vibration, we get stuck in paradigms and cycles that we do not want to be in. And so we have to make sure that we are staying in higher vibration and coming in wholeness and making sure that we are mindful of what we're bringing to the table at all times so that we can manifest that which we seek to manifest. And so we're not looking around wondering, where are my finances? Where are my crops? Where are my, you know what I mean?
Right.
Where is all the, where is all the blessings that I'm looking for? And we're, looking around wondering and not realizing that it's because we have not shown up in wholeness. We are um, doing things that are taking away from the community versus feeding and nourishing and empowering and uplifting it. It's a big task. Let me tell
Right.
you, it's not an easy assignment to show up in spiritual community and wholeness and have those etiquette and manners. Can be
Mhm.
very challenging because different people have different standards when it comes to that, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later as well. But yeah, that's really what it means to me. It's just showing up in wholeness and being respectful and kind and loving and all those things that we talked about last week as well. And just making sure that we are adding to raising the vibration of the community. How about you? What is spiritual manners and spiritual etiquette mean to you?
Oh, thank you for asking. So it really is that principle of do unto others as you would have them do unto yourself. That really is, I think, that's it. Um, I don't want to present it as like a code of conduct or a list of rules because there is fluidity. But just like you said, I love the wholeness. I love showing up in wholeness. I just want to say I love that concept and the way that you put that. I think that is really very true. And it is just showing up and being kind and being considerate of those who are around you and being conscious and aware. If we're going to be conscious community, then we need to be conscious not just of spirit, but of our fellow spiritual beings in human form and other beings, animals, plants, all of those things. But specifically, we're talking about human communities right now. But showing up and giving them the respect that you would want and treating them the way you would want to be treated, which doesn't always mean treating them and doing them the same way that you would want someone to do. It's doing to them what they would want, you know. I think some people call that the platinum rule. There's the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And then the platinum rule, which is do unto others as they would have you do unto them. Right. And so treating people the way they want to be treated is really, for me, what spiritual manners is all about, and not just people, but like just being spiritually conscious, using your discernment actively in community situations, resolving conflict with spirit in mind, with, you know, the other person in mind, and not just your ends and what your goals and your, it's me, and being self-centered. It really is being community focused. So that's what I see spiritual etiquette and spiritual manners as being. Um, I did want to point out that, like, I know etiquette and manners, they're kind of used interchangeably. And I think that's kind of how we're using them in this sense when we're talking about this. I know etiquette can be seen as a word that means code of conduct, but it's not really. That's not what we're not talking about, a specific set of rules necessarily. I think there's guidelines, definitely, like general guidelines, which we're going to get more into in just a minute. Um, but I did want to point that out to anybody who's listening. We're not talking about hard and fast rules. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about using your spiritual discernment to know in a situation, to read the room, and show up the way you would want someone to show up for you, right? So that said, now we kind of have an idea of like what we're talking about when we say spiritual manners, spiritual etiquette. Uni, why is this so important? Why do we need to talk about this? Why is this important to have spiritual manners and spiritual etiquette?
I think it's for several reasons. Only, number one, we we come into these communities because we're seeking some sort of refuge, right? We're seeking refuge from the world. We've been out in the world. We know that the food that we're eating, or that we were taught to eat, isn't as healthy as it really was taught to us. We know that some of these religious ideologies that have been ingrained in us are not, helpful. We learn about, this whole patriarchal kind of society, that we are living in, and how harmful it is to both man and woman. And, there's just so many things that we experience kind of out in the world. And while we're still in the world, of course, we seek spiritual community for some sort of solace, some sort of relief from, that which we have experienced out in the world. And a lot of times we come into these communities and we share what we have experienced with each other out,
Mm-hmm.
what we experience out in the world with each other in these communities. And when we, excuse me, when we turn around and we bring those actions and thoughts and emotions with us without having any sort of a barrier, without having any sort of a filter, what we do is we continue to harm ourselves and others. Keywords: ourselves and others. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just us harming others when we lack spiritual etiquette or spiritual manners, we're harming ourselves just as well. And so, for me, that's why it's really key. It's key for us to it's important for us to make sure that we get, I don't know, like when I'm in a spiritual community, or I'll say it like this: when I lead spiritual communities, because I've led, held space for others, for me, it has to be a safe space, like a safe kind of container. Like one of my spiritual teachers, she would always say, like, this is a container, you know what I mean? And when you're in a safe container, like you're protected from the outside,
Mhm.
you're protected from all the elements that could, potentially harm you. And I think it's so important for us to get into this container so that we can really start to create that foundation so that our communities can start to grow it back into ways that are more um, human based, like more helpful, more healthy for us, you know what I mean,
Mhm.
overall. And so, that's really what I think it's about. That's why for me it's like, we have to find a safe space. And when people don't think about what they're doing and they come into spiritual communities and they're lacking etiquette, they're lacking manners, what they're doing is they are causing more trauma, they're causing harm, and it's just unhealthy, where you are pretending as if you are seeking the same solace as them, but you're coming in and you're actually doing the same things that was done to you, or you're inflicting the same harm that was done to others. And so I just think it's so important for us to have a real safe space. And even with the church, a lot of people went to the church because they were looking for, family, they were looking for safety, they were looking for some relief from, the harm in everyday, life. And unfortunately, they ended up getting hurt, even more. And it's,
Mhm.
we can't do that. Like, we can't have that. Not on my watch. You know what I mean? We have to get to that space where we know that this is a safe space, because we know that there is growth that can be done, and there are new plateaus to reach, and there are things that we are here to do in this world, and one of them is to heal from some of these traumatic experiences, and you can't do that when you're in the space creating more of that. So yeah, that's kind of like my take on it. I could talk for days, but why are spiritual matters important to you?
um well, I was thinking about this and kind of meditating on it and asking spirit, like, why is this so important? And what I got, the kind of the download that I got, was that in spiritual community, we are representative of God. We are the image and likeness of God, right? And we are here to perfect that as humans, right? Because humans are not perfect. And will we ever perfect it? No, but we're supposed to constantly be moving toward that. And as a representative of the universal spirit, God, oneness, whatever you want to call the higher being, that is our very life, how how would God treat you? How would, I think it's kind of like the Christians with, what would Jesus do? Yeah. Uh, but I mean, it's accurate, because what would God do in this situation? How would God present itself to someone who is hurting? How would God present themselves in conflict when what they're, what God is trying to present is in conflict? And we know that God is very gentle and not forceful and not pushy, and will let you go out there and make mistakes, but is it going to push, and isn't going to throw itself on you when and so those are that was what really kind of came to me as I was thinking, meditating on this, and my kitty. And I do think what you said is true. That safe container. I've definitely been in communities, religious communities, churches, metaphysical communities, spiritual communities that did not feel safe, and I don't want to perpetuate that. I don't want anyone in my community to feel like they cannot speak up, to feel as though they cannot be their full authentic self. As we were talking about last week, how important authenticity is in spiritual community, how it's the place where you get to show up as who you really are. And you can't do that without a certain level of manners, a certain level of etiquette in which all the members of the community have an agreement that we are going to conduct ourselves in a certain way. We are going to handle conflict in a certain way. This is how we are going to present ourselves. And this is how we're going to show up for each other. You know, it's community. Being in community it's an agreement. You know, it really is. It's, I agree to be there and show up for you in a certain way, and you agree to be there and show up for me in a certain way. And that's really why I think it's so important to have these conversations. I think that really is, that's a big part of the why. And you know, we'll probably get further into that as we talk, but I think it's important to know what your kind of guidelines are for your spiritual manners, and also to have these conversations constantly so that they evolve and grow, and so that everyone is aware and everyone can agree. And I think the biggest and most important reason to have spiritual manners and etiquette as a representative of God is to enhance the unity of the community, right? You can't bring people together if they feel uncomfortable. You can't really have wholeness and oneness without there being a level of safety. So yeah,
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 absolutely. And that's one of the things that we, one of the themes that we keep discussing, and it's going to keep coming up, getting back to oneness, getting to the wholeness. Our true selves is oneness and wholeness with each other.
right.
And no, you can't have that if, you're in community and one person is, harming, or, the other, being rude and inconsiderate. You can't have that. Eventually, people are going to either, they're going to shrink, like you said, they're not going to be their authentic self. They're not going to feel comfortable speaking and sharing and opening up, or just being
Mhm.
honest about their thoughts, which could be helpful to everyone else. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And when people shut down, I know I've done it plenty of times where I'm like, okay, listen, I have nothing left to say here because either I'm not being listened to or I'm not being respected. And it's a space that I'm in. And eventually I shut down until, it's I end up leaving. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, and now what do we have now? We have disconnection. We have separateness and all of that. So yeah, it's very important for us to make sure that we are, holding space for each other, to be authentic and to show up, and not bringing, like negative mindsets
Mm.
that come from out in the world. Some of us have been through some very traumatic experiences, and it can cause us to be a bit jaded, and
Right.
I get it. I get that for sure.
Right.
And it's just important to make sure that you handle that before you start to interact with other people, in any community, much less spiritual community, but in any community. You want to handle that jadedness. You want to make sure that you are not, again, just bringing the vibe down, or I'll say, or putting things out there, that, because again, okay, so we have these powerful things called tongues.
Right.
Create worlds, and we create our lives and we manifest, and it's like sometimes people speak over, other people and situations and things, and it's like, if if what would have happened if no one, if you didn't say that, you know what I mean? Would it have still
Mhm.
felt like that? Do you know how powerful you really are? So it's very important to check that and make sure that you do your shadow work, you heal your inner child, get back to that wholeness so that you can show up for community and make sure that you are, as you said, Umi, doing the work of the Most High, of
Right.
yourself, of myself, of me, of us, of all of us together.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it comes to balance. Definitely when you're talking about like bringing the negativity and I don't want anyone to think that what we're saying is that like you have to be in a positive state all the time. That's not it at all. But you do have those people who are energy vampires who just drain you with all the bad and they don't see any of the good in any situation, and they're constantly draining you. And it's really about balancing um what you're taking from the community to what you're giving to the community. If you're in a community and you're only a taker and you're not a giver, then that it makes people not want to be around you. um and not because they don't like you or anything like that, but because physically our these bodies have a certain amount of energy that they can hold, and we're all trying to increase the capacity of what we can hold. And when you're trying to do that, having someone drain that energy on a consistent basis makes you need to take a break from them. It's not a personal thing against the person, it's a personal thing to the person who needs to, like, I need a breath, I need to get away from this person for a little while, I can't take it anymore. And so I would never want to be that person, and I know in the past I have been. So I'm not making fun of anyone, and I'm not talking down on anyone for being that person, cuz baby, it was me. I used to be that person that could not see any of the good in anything. I always just felt like everything was and I had to get into a gratitude practice to get myself out of that. But that's neither here nor there, really. What I'm saying is it's really about balance. If you see that you're taking more than you're giving, or even that you're giving more than you're taking, because at a certain point that becomes resentment, right? It becomes exhaustion. It becomes, I can't do this anymore and I don't want to be a part of this anymore. I'm being taken advantage of. So there's a balance thing, and spiritual etiquette goes in many different directions. It's not just how mean or kind you are, although that is big. It's also, are you giving, are you taking, are you, how much are you participating, are you not participating enough, are you participating too much, are you, you know there's a lot to consider. And so yeah, it's a really multifaceted conversation about why this is important and what the purpose of it is. But that said, I kind of want to get us to get into what are some of the basic tenets, manners, like what are the most important things that you feel, and I'll put it to you first. What are the most important aspects of spiritual manners? Like, I don't want to call them rules, so that's why I'm kind of having a hard time of putting, because I don't want to call them rules, but guidelines. Let's call them guidelines. What are your most important guidelines for having spiritual etiquette?
I would say, like, definitely strive to show up in kindness. You know what I mean? There's a saying that says that, people are dealing with things that you have no idea about.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know what someone is dealing with. Someone like me, I may not share all the things that I'm going through. And, a lot of times people don't know the half of what I'm going through until later on, where I'm like, listen, I was going through hell at that point in my life.
Right.
I don't even know. And I was still showing up. And so I think kindness is really just one of them. I think, listening, you know, um, I've been in, there's always going to be people who, are more outspoken and people who are more like kind of like introverted or whatever. But, if you find that you're the type of person who speaks a lot, try, like you said, getting some balance in listening. Listening
Mm-hmm.
is very important, because what people don't realize, I think a lot of times, before someone decides to, disconnect, or before someone shuts down, a lot of times people have told you, or they've given you clues and let you know that they were uncomfortable and things like that. And if you really want to stay in community with people, you want to listen to them, hear what they're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's not going to be as loud as you, as boisterous, and everyone's not going to have the just certain ways of saying things, but just really listen. Listening is very important. I would say another one is, I think we kind of touched on it a little bit last week about sharing, and this goes along with listening as well, like not oversharing. You know what I mean? Like making sure that you are being mindful of how much you're sharing and how many times you tell the same stories over and over and things of that nature. Like it's so important. I think that's something that's very important to like really point out, because again, a lot of us, when we come into these communities, we end up sharing a lot of our experiences out that have happened to us out in the world. But again, it's like when you constantly are repeating it and sharing things over and over, it can, it can definitely put a damper on things. And you have to get to some point of resolve, what I
Mm-hmm.
and figure out how to move forward, because essentially, in my opinion, a real key principle for me when I'm in community is, what are we doing? What are we producing? What's going on here? Are we learning? Are we healing? Are we growing? Are we working together? Are we making the world a better place by coming together? Like, having a core value for coming together with people is extremely important. I
Mm-hmm.
know for me, I've gotten in, I've connected with, different communities, and then later on I've been like, this isn't really, maybe I didn't think this one through, you know what I mean? But I'm about creating things when I come in community with people. Like, what are we doing here?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so I think that understanding like what your purpose is for coming together is extremely important when you're in communities, and you're thinking of your spiritual etiquette, because in manners, because that's going to help you to stay in alignment with that. When you know what you're here for, then you know what you got to do. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a big one for me. I think that's it for now. Like, what about you? What are some that you have? I mean, I can always circle back.
Um, before we get into before I talk about mine, I wanted to comment on that last one that you were talking about, like having a purpose and what are we here for? Um, would you say that like kind of making sure that the community that you're joining or that you're a part of is a good fit is a part of that? Because we had a little bit of a conversation about this in the pre-meeting about how you may join a community because it seems to have a interests that you're interested in. The example we had used was yoga, like a yoga community, and that, okay, great, they're spiritual, they're talking about principle, and yes, they are, um, they are in line with like your spiritual beliefs and things like that, but they're a community that likes to joke around in a kind of, harsh way, right? When you're a person who doesn't like harshness.
I don't like harshness.
I don't like harshness either. Like I can play and be and tease and
A little bit,
a
yeah.
little bit here and there, but that's just not the kind of community. And this is not to say that being in a community that likes to play harshly is wrong. It's just maybe it's not a good fit for you.
Yeah.
And so you're constantly showing up feeling uncomfortable and not wanted, and uh like and kind of bringing the vibe of that group down when their vibe is great when they're all together, you know what I mean? So I wanted to bring that up because that kind of sounded like in line with what you were saying about, you know, what are we doing here? Why are we here together? Is this, what is the purpose of us coming together?
Yeah.
And yeah, so what do you say about that?
Yeah, I think that's definitely looking at it from a more, I think the words you used was discerning, perspective, and making sure that yeah, while your spiritual goals may align, maybe your personalities don't align. You know what I mean? Maybe, and that's something that I had to learn, as I've gotten older as well. Like, oh, okay, like I've, joined different spiritual communities, and you got some people who are, just very, like you said, very harsh, very outspoken, very, no filter. And over here, I'm like, filter, filter, filter. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
like, I don't know. So yeah, I agree. I think that it's more than just like core values and things. Like, it's also about personality matches and things like that, and understanding that sometimes while you have the same goals, you may not have the same approaches to those goals, and
Right.
you may not have the same way that you go about it. I was talking to someone, a friend last week. We were talking about these personality tests that you take kind of like at work, and I was telling them how you have like certain people who are more like steady or stable. You have ones that are more inquisitive, ones who are more like conscientious and more strategic. You have dominating personalities, and dominating personalities, sometimes they love all the banter, they love going head to head, they're like two bulls, and they're
Yeah.
locked, they love that. And I'm like, yeah, okay, could you stay over there with that though? Like, I don't want to lock horns with anybody.
Right.
Smooth sailing, and you know what I mean. Like, my life has been pretty challenging, and I want peace, I want calm, I want, you know what I mean, I want things to be as copacetic and steady as possible. You know what I mean? This is what
Right.
makes me happy. And so yeah, definitely understanding like different personality types, and whether or not people can understand. Sometimes people are like, oh, that's just Uni, that's how she is, but I don't want to be, oh, that's just Uni, that's how she is, even
Right.
my personal life with family and friends, like, oh, that's just her. That's, I don't want that. I want people who like understand and kind of feel the same way I feel. And while I think that sometimes it can be a bit there can be challenges with that too, because sometimes you need a little fire, you need all the elements, you need the fire, you need the air, you need the earth for the steady, you know what I mean, you need the
Right.
water for the flow. But some of us can, our capacity is but so much, and so you got to find your tribe.
Right.
Really important to make sure that you're upfront and honest, and sometimes you don't really know until you get a little old. Like, for me, the older I get, the more I learn about myself, the more, the closer I get to myself, and I'm like, okay, yeah, no, I don't like that. You know what I mean?
Right. Mm-hmm.
New spaces, and I'm like, I've never been here before. I'm open to trying it, and I'm just like, yeah, no, that's not for me, and that's okay. But being, allowing yourself also, I think, to pivot is very important in this too. Like, it's important
Mm.
to say, okay, this isn't for me. Let me gracefully bow out. So I know I went around the world, but hopefully that answers.
No, I everything that you said, I completely understand and agree with. Um, so getting back to kind of some of the core aspects of what I feel like are good spiritual manners. You said first, showing up in kindness, and I feel like pointing out that for me, a big part of that is avoiding gossip. Yeah. Avoiding gossip to me is really important in community. And that's not to say that you can't have a conversation about a third party person and something they're going to, particularly if you need to seek counsel and how to deal with that. Um, you know, that's fine. But gossip in the sense of, oh, did you hear? Oh my God, this person did this. And, that kind of um, gossip, it doesn't do anything but do harm. it's not your, if it's not your information to tell, then you shouldn't be telling it. You shouldn't be, it's not your thing, then you shouldn't be talking about it. And um I think I used to be a lot worse about I've never been a big gossiper, but I'd be one to kind of not really say anything about it. And as I've gotten older, and more sure and confident in myself, and more confident in spirit and my guidance and my discernment, I've kind of shied away, where I'll either walk away if I feel like it's someone who I can't really have a conversation with about how I don't like what they're doing, or how that what they're doing is not really appropriate. I've literally just walked away, like, hey, I gotta run. I'll make a reason to leave, or I've pointed it out to people, like, hey, I'm not into gossiping. That doesn't have anything to do with me, so I don't want to talk about that. A really great method that one of my teachers, Karen Karen Mills Austin, she said, she was in a situation at one point where she was in a room where there was some gossip happening, and someone was just like, I think we need to pray. I just think, could someone say a prayer, like, and just kind of shift the energy of that. So like there's different ways that you can deal with it, but to the best of like it, I feel like any community that I join, I would want there to be an agreement of avoiding gossip, you know. I feel like that because it's just so hard, it can be so harmful.
It is. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so that's a big one for me. Discernment is always a big one. Is, are you using your discernment in any given situation? Are you using your discernment when you say yes to that? Are you using your discernment when you say no to that? Are you using your discernment when you trauma dump? Have you and in addition to discernment, consent.
Yeah.
Consent is huge. Um, because without the consent of other parties, well, now you're violating, you know, that person.
Yeah.
And it may seem insignificant to you, but it could be significant to them. And that's not kindness. That's not love. You know, you may think, oh, but this is in their best interest. Well, that's great, but as a representative of God, who I know does not force anybody to do anything, you cannot force someone. You can't, if you don't have their consent to have that conversation, to speak to them in that specific way, if you don't have their consent to be in that place near them at that, you know what I mean? Like, these are things you have to think about. And so consent is really high on the list for me of making sure that everyone, like, yes, there has to be hierarchies in certain situations. Like, you may be working on a group project and then the group leader goes, you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this. Well, great. I get that there has to be a leader and somebody has to delegate the work, but are you okay with doing this? Do you feel comfortable doing this? Do you think that you can handle this? There'll be support. You know what I mean? Like, but getting their consent before just dumping things on people in the community. I had that problem so much when I was in the church, because I'm so tech savvy. Like, I would just get thrown into being the tech person. Oh, we need you to, program the teleprompter. And I'm like, I've never programmed a teleprompter. I don't know what I'm doing. And then here I am searching it up, trying to figure out, spending hours and hours and hours. And that's how a person begins to feel like they're being taken advantage of. I didn't consent to that. You know what I mean? You just kind of like, oh, do this. And then I felt like I was in this awkward situation where if I didn't do it, I'd be kind of looked at weird or treated weird or whatever. So yeah, consent is a big one for me too. So um I think openness, being open and honest, integrity, being in integrity at all times as much as possible. Everybody falls out of integrity on occasion due to emotions and other things, but trying your best to stay in integrity and communicate and be open about instances in which you may not live up to the integrity that you want to have. And that accountability, I think, is really what it is being accountable. And we talk about that all the time. It's always something that you talk about. It's one of the reasons why we are still connected is because of our accountability circle. So accountability is huge, accountability, integrity, having integrity, give consent, those are just some guidelines of kind of what I see as having good spiritual etiquette and spiritual manners. Is there anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I love those. I feel like, you know, when you spoke a little earlier about, kind of treating others as you want to be treated, I've definitely seen people who have claimed to have integrity who don't do that. So when you say integrity, you're saying, oh, what I think, I speak, I share, you know what I mean? Everything is in
Right.
alignment. But there can be, people have to watch out for hypocrisy, do not, and I mean under any circumstances, do not dish out that which you would not accept, and it's really simple as that. um, and I think that, a lot of times people just, they're not necessarily tending to their own energy in a
Mm-hmm.
very positive, helpful way. And so they don't always realize the harm that they're causing themselves either sometimes. You know what I mean? Like like sometimes, I'm a person who believes that, banter and like cracking on people and joking on people. Like I'm against that. Like I don't even play like that. You know what I mean? I think your words are that powerful that you
Right.
should definitely always speak to each other with as much respect as possible. A little joke here and there, but you got to use your discernment and be mindful, because these are, again, our tongues are so powerful that we are creating our world, you know what I mean? And we don't realize the harm that's being done, sometimes even on a micro level energetically. Sometimes people don't
Right.
understand that, that thing that you thought was a joke is starting to pour down here. That thing you thought was a joke, it can be very harmful, you know what I mean, spiritually
Mm-hmm.
to someone. So, definitely making sure that you're in your wholeness and you're tending to your spiritual, tending to your energy at all times. And I'm sorry, this rain is like really distracting me.
Yeah, I can hear it. I
There's
can
a
hear
skylight up here. Yeah, sorry.
Hey, it happens. I have dogs barking, cats meowing, kids. It is what it is. This is life, y'all. This is life. We are real people. We are not in a studio that's closed and quiet. No.
Just
uh,
a little bit.
yeah. So, all right. So I kind of want to recap. We were saying showing up in kindness, making sure that you're listening, using discernment, avoiding gossip, um, making sure that you have consent and that you're in integrity and holding yourself accountable. Um, oh, one of the things I wanted to add to that was to that list is kind of just being self-correcting and self-aware,
Yeah.
because that's what it really starts with. If you're being self-correcting and being self-aware, I feel like everything eventually will work itself out. If each member of the community is self-aware, then and constantly seeking growth and to be better and to do better, then that's the kind of community that I would want to be a part of, right? Because I would feel safe, because even if someone misstepped, I would know that they would hold themselves accountable,
Yeah.
you
That's,
know?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm sure I missed some, but we're going to keep moving forward. Um, We don't really, I don't know how to really ask this question. I don't know if it's a question, but I did want to point out the importance of spiritual etiquette and spiritual manners in handling conflict.
Mm.
We spoke about it very briefly, and I think it's a great topic for maybe even, one of the themes of the month of like how to handle conflict in spiritual community. Um, I also feel like we may need to bring in some people to have conversations about this because I'll be honest, I'm not the one who's mastered not spiritual conflict, but conflict period, just with other humans. I'm probably not the best. I'm more avoidant. You know what I mean? I can be confrontational. Don't get me wrong. I'm a trained attorney, so confrontation was what I learned to do. And and that's something that I think is what makes me aware of this, is because when I was trained as a lawyer, I found that I became more confrontational, and I found myself in more conflicting. I mean, that's what you do, is you deal with conflict as an attorney, right? But then you become somebody who's more in,
As
like
a
that.
yeah,
Right. And then when I realized that about myself, as I came more into my spiritual awareness and my awakening, I became the opposite, and I became somebody who kind of wants to avoid conflict and doesn't want to, and neither one of those is good because the conflict never actually gets resolved,
right,
right? I don't want to be a bulldozer, and I also don't want to be bulldozed.
right.
And so I feel like it's really important for us to develop spiritual etiquette and spiritual manners around how we handle conflict.
Yeah.
Um, what do you have to add to that?
Similar to my earlier conversation, what I spoke about earlier, dealing with different personality types. So I'm the type of person, I will speak my piece. Like, I'll say what I need to say. When people don't listen, when they don't respect my perspective, or what I'm, the thing that I'm bringing up, that I'm trying to resolve, um, sometimes that's when I get like kind of like avoidant, where I like shut down. I go about my business. I'm like, okay, this isn't going to, depending on the relationship, I may just be like, okay, like, just do your thing, stay over there, leave me alone. You know what I mean?
Right.
And if I feel like I can exit stage left, I'm gonna exit stage left, because I'm not being respected. My voice is not being heard, and I don't want to have to get to that point where I have to like stoop down to a level that I don't want to be at. Like, I don't want to become a bulldozer. I don't want to be rude and disrespectful, and I don't want to have to do that. You know what I mean? I want to be in community with people who hear me, you know, um, preferably the first time I say it, but I give a little, I give grace, you know what I mean? Sometimes, because like for me, I'm the type, like, sometimes I need a little time for things to kind of like register. I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. But I think that, I'm in kind of the same boat as you, where, it can be a little bit challenging for me, because I feel like a lot of times I attract, people who are, their personality just doesn't respect, they, some people love that, like, they love to, you know what I mean, like I said, like, different personality types, and so as I've gotten older, more mature, I've, been working on making sure that I am connecting with people who have a similar, disposition about these things, where they, they'll bring it up, they'll speak their piece, they say what needs to be said, and if I speak up, does this person hear me? Do they acknowledge it? Do they say "fub"? Like, some
Right.
people laugh and joke. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
what is, so, just like for me, like I said, I think that it's really important to know, you know, who you are, and what it is that, how you deal with conflict. There's all kinds of free, personality tests, and you can kind of see and, check them out. Maybe we'll try to put some in the description, add them later on, to like help you with that. But just understanding like your personality, and it also, a lot of them will help you understand the personality of others. So like, okay, when you come into contact with this type of person, you may experience X, Y, and Z, and you know what I mean, and how to deal with it. I'm, like I said, I'm no expert, but I definitely, speak up. When I was younger, I would speak up more, and then I became very docile. But I would still say what I needed. Like I've always been the type to share that I was uncomfortable with things. Whether people heard me or not is a whole nother story.
Right.
But I think the most important thing is just being authentic and honest. And if you have to, leave a community or separate or whatever, you know that you did it in the best way that you could. You shared, you said what you had to say. If they couldn't hear you, they couldn't respect you, then you need to go. In the Bible it says wipe the dust off and keep going.
Right.
Peace return to you. You came there in peace. Leave with your peace. That's the best uh, advice I can give anybody. Is
Right.
when you know that you've done your best. You do no harm, you take no ish. At the end of the day, you have to find
Right.
that balance. And it's not always easy. Life isn't perfect, but you do the best that you can.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
I'm
can hear that rain. Oh my gosh, it's so loud.
It's so distracting. I'm sorry, but I'm home
So
here.
yeah, no, I it's cool. It sounds amazing. Um,
Yeah.
sounds like good sleeping weather.
Yeah, seriously.
So we're almost out of time. The last thing I really wanted to bring up was the importance of having conversations in your community about these um, guidelines, these spiritual manners and etiquette that you are seeking to have in that community. Um, that just having, not just having the conversations, but agreeing, having agreements of, and they can be written, unwritten, but they should always be spoken. I feel like there should be a conversation, on a regular basis, either as just an ongoing thing, as a part of, kind of what the conversation that comes up in your group or whatever community it is, or as a scheduled, like every few months, we're going to have a conversation about spiritual etiquette and what's expected and how you're expected to show up. I think it's really important because it lends itself to authenticity. It lends itself to openness and genuineness, and helps to avoid conflicts before it even starts. And it sets expectations, and loose expectations. Nothing should be rigid. I'm really adamant about making sure that everybody understands that. Like, I don't think that there's any hard and fast rules ever, right? There are guidelines, and that's what should be discussed. Is what are the guidelines? How do we go about this? What do we value as a community? How do we want to show up as a community? Um, and so that's kind of like the last thing I really wanted to talk about. And I wanted to see, what your thoughts were on that.
So I feel like number one, it's up to the kind of leader or the guide of the community to make sure they're taking the pulse. I
Hmm.
think that when you open a container or spiritual space, I don't care if this is a workshop, I don't care if you're doing a guided meditation with a group, I don't care if it's a class, it doesn't matter what it is. As the leader of this group, as the person who has opened this sacred container, you need to let your people know who have either paid for your services or made some sort of uh, a commitment to join you on a journey for however long, that if they feel unsafe, if they feel uncomfortable, that they can come to you, right? So I
Right.
think that's first and foremost. So, like you said, like we should have established conversations. There should be, loose guidelines. But as a leader, I think that's a key point that has been missing in every community that I've joined, you know what I mean, that I wasn't specifically, and even ones that I've led, I'm like, oh, later on down the line, I'm like, I've observed, certain things. And maybe I would, talk to people on the side a little bit and say, hey, my Aquarius moon can be very like welcoming to all the different types of people, and but just talking to different people and saying, hey, let's keep an open mind, let's be kind, let's do this, let's do that. But I think that as just as a spiritual leader, again, I think it's so important for them to for us to have to I hear Owen, he's like, yeah, you know make sure that people know that they can come to you if they feel
Mm-hmm.
comfortable. I can't tell you how many communities I've been involved in, and there has been I'm on a live, and I'm maybe in a class, and maybe I'm like typing or sharing in the comments, and obviously no one is monitoring the chat or anything, but there has been rude things that have been said to me, and I'm like, where's this come from?
Right.
And here's some unhealed person who can't control themselves, and they're saying something rude or out of the way, and I'm just like, this is not what I'm here for. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that if I had if in addition to what you said, if there's anything that I want to mention, is that spirit people who open containers have to make sure that the people who are on this journey with you know that they can come and talk to you, and maybe you need to be monitoring a little bit closely as the leader, going back in the chat and reading and seeing if anything out of the way, because some people don't feel comfortable speaking up and sharing, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But this is your container. You have openness. So if there's any way for you, especially now they have the chats where it's saved and the transcripts and all of that, make sure that, people, you let them know they can come to you, because you don't know what level people are at. You know what I mean? And
Right.
again, you don't know the different personalities. Someone may even think it's just banter, and I'm looking at them like, this is the most disrespectful thing I've ever like,
Right.
this is
Right.
atrocious. Like, don't speak to me. You know what I mean? So I just think that that's a key part that has been missing from my perspective. And with the short, amount of time that we have left, that's something that I want to bring up. Make sure you're monitoring your chats. Make sure you're keeping an eye on things, and you are correcting any behavior. And especially if you see people start to pull back, then you know that, perhaps they are feeling, some level of discomfort. And it is up to you to hold space. Oh my God. This is so funny.
And God says, "Yep." That right there.
Jeez. What
Yeah.
about you? What do you and I know you shared the intro, and you shared some things initially about this. Do you have anything else to add?
Um. No, not really. I think you brought up a really good point when you said that, like, it's really up to leadership. Um. And I think that's really important to note. And I think that any community that you're a part of, when you don't know where that community is in its development, or in its starting, or even long time communities, maybe no one has ever said, hey, do we ever have conversations about and sometimes being that person to say, hey, can we have a conversation about how we treat each other in this, because I just want to know if this is where I should be.
Mm.
Not being afraid to kind of step up and do that, and understanding that no, not that's not for everybody. Not everybody is there, but for those who are maybe more spiritually grounded and advanced in study, or at a certain level, or at a certain time, being the one to step up and say, you know maybe we should have a conversation about this. This is something we should bring to the table. I don't know that we have a good enough guideline of how things should run around here, how we should treat each other around here. Um, but yeah, that's really it. I think we kind of covered everything we wanted to talk about today and more. And it's 7 o'clock, and we are right on time for wrapping things up. I want to say thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you to everyone who watches us live, watches us after. We really, really appreciate it. We love when you comment, when you like, when you reach out to us. Please continue to do that. Share, subscribe if you haven't. If you're just watching this and you haven't subscribed yet, please. Subscriptions really they help us with getting this in front of other people who may need to hear these conversations, to have these conversations. I'm sure there are people in spiritual communities who are going, is this really how it's supposed to be? And may need to hear this conversation about the fact that there should be spiritual etiquette. There should be etiquette in spiritual communities too. It's there's no hierarchy here, but at the same time, treat others the way that you want to be treated. Anything else you want to say before we wrap up and say goodbye?
No, just thank you so much, Umi, for leading this conversation and guiding and sharing your grounded perspective, and keeping us on track. This has been an amazing conversation, one that I was looking forward to, and I can't wait to even have more conversations about this. Like you said, I really think that this is a key element that is missing in a lot of spiritual communities, and why we find that a lot of them may be falling apart, and why they're not getting off the ground and the traction that people would like them to get. And so
Mm-hmm.
I really think that more conversations should and will be had about this, and I'm really looking forward to it. So yeah, thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for being my beautiful, wonderful co host. And thank you to everybody who's watching and who will watch later. We appreciate you. We love you. And peace.
Peace, people.